Welcome back to Small World Geopolitics. I'm David Small. There are three kinds of responses to the current war on Iran. There are those who condemn it as a war of Zionist expansion and aggression and a breach of international law. There are those who wholeheartedly and unreservedly support it. And then there are those who express concern and aren't totally supportive of the war, but always preface their comments with a condemnation of the Iranian regime. Very similar to what happened during the height of the genocide in Gaza. People would go, oh, don't support the genocide, but we hate Hamas. Hamas are terrible. And exactly the same thing with Israeli aggression in Lebanon. Israel shouldn't really be bombing Beirut, but Hezbollah are terrorists and somebody's got to do something about it. And you have big influencers like Piers Morgan who have people on their show who aren't allowed to say anything about the genocide unless they preface it with a condemnation of Hamas. Recently, he had Mehdi Hussein on his program. He wouldn't let him say anything unless he prefaced it with a confirmation that he thought that that the world was a better place with the death of the Iranian supreme leader. It's quite a dangerous, slippery slope with all of this because when you buy into all of those sorts of things about Hamas and Hezbollah being terrorists, and you can't condemn Israel without equally condemning them, you put them in that same kind of category. And with both of those organizations, they are organizations that have risen up in response to Israeli and Zionist aggression. The invasions of Lebanon, the constant persecution and attacks and killings and repression of Palestinians in Gaza, that's what's given rise to these liberation movements, these groups of resistance. And their right to resist this sort of aggression and occupation is clearly recognized in international law. It is Israel who is the outlaw in these circumstances. But the way the Western media has framed it, to the extent that there's been any criticism of the genocide at all, still not even really allowed to call it a genocide, it's always like, yeah, but Hamas and Hezbollah are terrorists. And that's what we're getting with this war as well. We're getting people who go, oh, Iran are terrible and the world would be a much better place if they were obliterated. It's probably not very nice that this war's going on, but they should be gone. And part of the reason they should be gone, and you get Israel saying this, is Israel's doing the world's dirty work for it. That one of the big troubles with Iran is that they are a destabilizing force in the region. And how are they a destabilizing force? Because they sponsor terrorists, because they sponsor and support Hezbollah and Hamas. And because people have already bought into Hamas and Hezbollah are terrorists, here we go, and there's an actual justification. But the people think, oh yeah, they do that. And we can't have people supporting terrorism. The international law and the conventions on genocide are very, very clear. They give an obligation to everybody, state and non-state actors alike, to do whatever they can to stop the genocide. Israel is committing a genocide in Gaza and was for years. Hardly any countries in the world stood up to and upheld their obligations to do something about that. Hezbollah did, Hamas certainly did, Ansar Allah, or the Houthis in Yemen did, and Iran did. Iran, the only sort of formal nation state that did. And so supporting those groups and doing the work it did to support Palestine was its obligation under international law. Yet we have this kind of dominant view that emerges now that one of the terrible things about Iran is that they sponsor terrorism. They don't sponsor terrorism. They fulfill their obligation in a way that no other country in the world has to stand up against genocide. And that's why they are being targeted. They are being targeted because they oppose the genocide, because they stand up against Zionist expansionism. They stand up against American imperialism. And so, irrespective of all of the other sideshows about what kind of way that Iran is governed, that is the key issue. That is the key issue. And for people who are wanting to create a better, more just, more peaceful world, I think the only defensible position is to condemn unequivocally the war of aggression of Israel and the United States against Iran, and stand with Iran in its refusal to buckle down and comply with this imperialist Zionist expansionist program. The other thing about these people who oppose the war but also oppose Iran is that they tend to be pushing a position where they're calling for a ceasefire and calling for negotiations and all of that, which sounds very reasonable, except that it's also the American position. So they are actually lining up behind the American position. And the media are presenting this as this is the reasonable thing to do, and Iran's opposition to ceasefire and negotiations is an unreasonable position. This, of course, ignores the history of negotiations. Prior to this, there were 2 rounds of negotiations, and in the middle of those negotiations, in which Iran was seriously engaging, they got bombed. So there is zero trust now, but for the US and Israel from Iran, and with good reason. Last time when they agreed to a ceasefire, as we can see, all that did was give the US and Israel several months to rearm and then come and attack them again. Now that they're in a position of strength, why would they stop? Why would they agree to a ceasefire? Why would they agree to negotiations without absolute cast iron certainty that they can make sure this doesn't happen again? And the difficulty with that is that there is now no basis for trust. They cannot sign up to an agreement or engage in anything where they take the word of the US or Israel that anything will happen. Something has to be concrete. Something has to have actually happened before this process can take place. So calling for talks and calling for ceasefire now is actually, it isn't a neutral statement. It is a declaration of support for the American position, for the American and Israeli war of aggression on Iran.